One of the hardest parts about being a founder and one of the most exciting parts is the amount of learnings you get by going through constant failure, rejection over and over again. I like to say the founder's journey is like a decade-long journey of getting rejected so much, failing like every single day, and until one day you succeed.
Hello and welcome to Behind Numbers, the podcast where we look beyond the surface to uncover what's not visible from the outside. Today, I am joined by Saroop Bharwani, founder and CEO of Senso AI, the knowledge orchestration layer for AGI, and one of the voices helping executives and builders understanding how rapidly the future is arriving. Saroop has launched multiple companies, mentored founders, invested in next-generation AI startups, and helped grow a global community of more than 20,000 people experimenting with self-evolving multi-agent systems. Saroop, welcome to Behind Numbers.
Alessandro, so good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, likewise. And let's first start to get to know you from a personal level. Tell us something about you, about your family, about your history, about your past.
Yeah, happy to. You know a lot of this story, but I am from Toronto, Canada. And one thing I'll say about myself is I've always been a tinkerer. I've always been a builder growing up. My dad taught me how to code from a young age, and I was just fascinated by technology and computation from an early age. I'm a computer engineer. I went to school here at a university in Canada. And one of my first classes in university back in the early 2000s was a class about artificial intelligence. And I was just fascinated by the concept of AI back then. And it inspired me to do a minor in neuropsychology to just think about the intersections between the human brain and AI. And I never back then thought it would be a reality. But, fast forward, 2012 was a really inspirational year in Toronto when Jeff Hinton and the evolution of deep learning inspired me and made me feel like, wow, this AI thing can be a reality. And fast forward many years into the future, and here we are today, and it's a builder's utopia, right? It's the greatest time in history to build now.
And you just mentioned that you're a builder. And tell me if I'm wrong, but you have been building companies since your 20s. I'm just curious, what was the moment or the experience that first pushed you toward creating things rather than just working inside them? So getting out from that 9 to 5 job and starting building.
It's a great question. I think I've always had the entrepreneurial blood inside me. Like my grandfather was an entrepreneur and like he was one of my heroes growing up, just like really seeing him build and do what he did really well. He was really good at just like business development and people and really kind of just like building communities like I am. But it wasn't like until I got out of university and started working in a full-time environment where I did very, very well. I thrived, but I just could not take the bureaucratic environment of a large organization. I'm more of a guy where I like freedom to build and I like to build a team. And my team's exactly like this. My co-founder that likes to build alongside me, work directly with the people that are using products and just evolving that every single day. And while it's very difficult to fit a product you're building in a market, especially when you're building and committed to building something new, something at the edge, it just is something that just doesn't feel like work for me. And I could never go back to the full-time environment, at least up until now. Just building with people that I want to build with has just been like the passion of my life.
So what does it come first? Does it come first the idea of building something, or does it come first who I'm going to build this with?
I think the purpose and the end state is always something that ultimately you have to have conviction in from the beginning. But the way in which you build that into the market based on the moment in history we're in, that is where you got to be nimble and adaptable. And the only way to really enable that is like constant, fast iteration and working with the people that are actually using the product or who you think your users are to get really the value and the ROI story really, really tight between kind of what you're delivering and what users are consuming. And that's got to be consistent across the segment that you're targeting. And I just love that process, going back and forth, speaking with people and really building product. That intersection is where just it doesn't feel like work for me. I just love that process.
And Speaking with other founders, they were always stating, well, I built my first startup, it didn't go well. I built my second, and it went roughly well. And then I built my third. What I'm going is, so since you have built so many startups and so many companies and so many different ones, which is the connection between the first one that you built and the last one that you are now?
I've always been very passionate about building like communities of people that get better through technology. So the consistent thing with all my companies is how do you build connectivity with individuals? And I was always very enterprise focused. So how do you enable individuals in the enterprise to be more collaborative and really putting knowledge and data at the center of that? Where I get passionate about is seeing individuals that were disparate in their current workflows all of a sudden come together and realize new possibilities. And that's been a consistent trend that I've been very, very persistent on throughout any company that I've built or been a part of.
So tell me if I'm wrong. Every single company that you built so far, it is for helping people and professionals and companies on how to have a work stream or have a process that is better, it is quicker. But tell us more about what is Senso and what are you trying to solve there?
So at Senso, essentially what we do is we aggregate knowledge from inside the organization. Think of these as the lifeblood of the organization, your policies, your procedures, your guides. A lot of the organizations we work with are financial institutions. And so think of it as rate terms, policies, procedures that are traditionally stuck in static PDFs in SharePoint. And like that information is trapped because in a static document in like a PDF, you can't use that information in a way that you can get extreme value out of. What you can do is now with LLMs, you can actually take that data and put it into a structure where models can consume that and you can actually tie these workflows together. And as long as you can identify this broken workflow, you can really do some amazing things in terms of orchestrating knowledge to provide benefits to both staff members to save them time and the customers that they serve.
Wow. And you were also selected to join Y Combinator, right? Which is something that many founders describe as a defining moment in their journey. So I wanted to ask you, was it hard getting selected? And which are the learnings that you bring out from it?
Yeah, I mean, YCs is something that I've always wanted to be a part of. We happen to be at the right place, the right time with the right group partner, really liking what we did very early on in the cycle of this post ChatGPT era. And I had the luxury of been working on artificial intelligence from much well before ChatGPT launched. But I think right place, right time, it goes against the odds to get into YC because there's like tens of thousands of applications and like less than 1% get in. So I was very thankful to get into the program and be around builders like me, like really other tinkerers, like-minded individuals. Just being like in that environment for 4 months completely changed the way I thought. And I was an outsider. I came from an outside in perspective. Most individuals in YC leave companies like Meta and Google and DoorDash and have an idea and really start the journey of building their company. I came from the outside in. I was very enterprise focused, not from Silicon Valley. Coming into San Francisco and having that different perspective, like really allowed me to build great relationships, help other founders, but also seek help where I needed it in terms of like building the right talent and team in order to build the company in the way that we needed to be built. And it was just an incredible experience. It's the gift that keeps on building. San Francisco is like a melting pot of talent, and YC does a great job of keeping that community together after the program's completed.
Is it true that, generally speaking, when you go to YC, prior to being selected, you do have a 10-second pitch? And if you nail that 10-second pitch, then you can go on? Or is it just something that I read?
If you get selected for an interview, which is probably one of the hardest parts because it's like the sea of applications and you just got to be that flower that blooms. Well, the interview is like a 10-minute interview and it goes by lightning fast very quickly. And the first question that they generally ask is, what are you building? Right. And so really the conversation starts from there. And it is just a intense conversation of questions being thrown at you and really like having to have conviction in what your concept is, even though it'll change, and just why you're the best founding team to solve that problem because they are really good at picking the outliers and the numbers show it. And that interview process is really structured in a way where it's going to maximize the number of wins that they ultimately get.
How could you be so focused in 10 minutes in telling them everything so that you could be selected?
I think for us, we already had traction going into YC. The year before, we really had a really good feel of where this was all going. And we had customers and revenue, and we had conviction. It wasn't just an idea. And it was very, very early on in this sort of cycle of LLMs, this current cycle of AI and scaling laws. So we were early enough and we had enough traction to say, hey, knowledge in every enterprise is going to change. And we actually have proof points that show evidence that ultimately we can solve these disparate workflow problems that were never solvable before. And just being able to speak to that intelligently and like how this would play into the future, even though it wasn't fully correct at that point, but the fact that we had conviction in terms of the direction we were going in and customer references really, really helped us.
And you also mentioned that they are really good at choosing the right people. What do you think they've seen in your team that is hard to see from other teams outside?
What I realized about myself and Tom, my co-founder, is that unlike most individuals that go through YC, we had a lot of enterprise experiences that was outside of Silicon Valley. And that was a moment in time where vertical enterprise was getting a lot of attention from VCs and investors. And so a lot of it was, hey, we had a different perspective. We had experience in the enterprise to deliver complex software. And we also had the ability to engage a community of customers in a way that is required at this point in time, right? In order to generate the traction that they ultimately feel that we can get. And that's where our edge was. And again, we already had like proof points in customers going into the interview. So that certainly helped.
So you have spoken about yourself and then your founder, but as you grow and as you scale, how can you make sure that quality is always there, that the quality of your team, it is always at that top level?
Yeah, look, firstly, I'm so lucky. I have such a committed team. They come every day with their best, and they're the type of team that belongs in an uncertain startup environment that's building something completely new. So a lot of credit goes to my team and really like just providing them with what they need in order to execute in an uncertain environment and giving them the resources to do that, right? One of the things I encourage everyone in the company to do is learn how to go build an agent or learn how to adopt the tools necessary that will allow us to be more efficient. You have to find individuals that have the agency that ultimately want to learn that in their day-to-day jobs and spend their day-to-day jobs. And I speak with a lot of people in enterprises where they don't encourage that type of education. And frankly, the best people are going to leave companies that don't provide the resources necessary to learn the latest skill, especially the high agency ones that require that in order to thrive in these types of environments.
I feel that you mentioned one extremely key thing, which is I'm hiring people that are willing to learn. And talking about this, you are also coaching executive on thinking exponentially on all the AI and how AI is going to accelerate during the future. So I wanted to ask you, what is the biggest mindset shift that leaders need to make to understand the speed and the impact on what is coming?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and most of the individuals I tend to speak to about like the future and what the implications of this amazing technology is ultimately going to be is around mindset, right? One thing that enterprises in particular are used to is like these long 6, 12, 18-month plans, quarter over quarter tracking. And the issue with that in today's environment is that if you spend 6, 12, 18 months planning for something, by the time you bring that plan into production, it's likely going to be outdated, right? Because I spent a lot of time in the Bay Area and things are changing like every single day on the ground floor here. You don't feel it like when you're outside of the Bay Area. Maybe you'll hear something on the news of a new launch of a new model every month or 2 months, but there things are changing so fast. You hear a lot of news about the AI bubble. On the ground floor in Silicon Valley, you actually see things improve on a day-to-day basis. And the one thing that I see with enterprise users that are adopting this technology is they'll take a go at it. They'll implement an agent in a chat experience in customer support, for example, and it won't go perfect. The thing won't work today the way that they expected it. It'll make a mistake. It'll make an error. And I saw a lot of this last year, right? And they don't realize that 2 months, 3 months after that problem is likely to be solved. There's a new eval that's available or a new technique that you can use to solve that problem. But their mindset is biased towards like, oh, that failed and it's never going to succeed. And that like bias stuck in their head prevents them from actually taking on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and evolving. So it's more so I see a lot of individuals being held back because of experiencing a failure and not really being able to get back up and saying, hey, maybe tomorrow that will be solved because of this accelerated evolution of innovation we're seeing that's mostly coming out of the Bay Area.
How do you think that they can shift their mind or that they can take out those bias?
One of the hardest parts about being a founder and one of the most exciting parts is the amount of learnings you get by going through constant failure, rejection over and over again. I like to say the founder's journey is like a decade-long journey of getting rejected so much, failing like every single day, and until one day you succeed. Right? Like that's it, right? And I think that everybody's got to have the founders and builders mindset right now. Everybody's got to adopt it. And that's hard. You almost got to unlearn everything that the enterprise teaches you and relearn how to think like every day is day one. I may have failed at this yesterday, but like tomorrow I'm going to give it another go because that iterative process, while mentally exhausting and difficult, once you absorb that sort of uncertainty and live in the abyss day to day, you will learn more than you can ever learn in a textbook. And so that's part of the reason why I never did super well in a full-time environment. I like that uncertainty and I like the process of going through 100 failures until you see the light and success. And I think everybody needs to adopt that mindset now.
Have you ever thought, well, no, I'm going to quit. That's the bottom line. I'm going to go back to a 9 to 5 job or never?
Look, I'm on group chats with other founders all the time. We have 3 YC chats, like all the Toronto YC chat, New York, Silicon Valley, all these chats, right? And it's always ebbs and flows. As a founder, what you experience in the flows are like, wow, exhilaration. I always want to do this. The ebbs are very difficult, and the emotional education you get in terms of being able to handle those experiences when you're in those, yeah, like you feel like grass is always greener on the other side. I want to call Alessandro and be like, hey, can you buy my company? But at the top of it, when you're in the flow, you're in that state where I'm never going to sell my company. I'm going to go straight to IPO. So anyone who doesn't tell you they're going through that constant emotional state, that ebbs and flows like on a daily basis sometime, is completely lying to you. And the cool thing is, as you go through the ebbs and flows, you're able to handle like that emotional side in much more stable fashion. So the education you're really getting is how to deal with your emotions through very difficult times and very great times. Both are really important. And that stability is something that they do not teach in school.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. I get it. And we're always closing the podcast with one question. So if you could go back and change one thing, only one thing, a decision that you made, a mindset, or even something that you wish you had known earlier, what would it be and why?
That is a great question. Many of my Canadians aren't going to like this answer, but I would start to build my business in the US market in Silicon Valley. However, I'm still a Canadian company and I'm proud to be Canadian. I just feel like certain things about the Canadian environment and the startup ecosystem certainly need to change. And it is. Like one of my board members is a true advocate for Canadian technology. So I think location matters a lot. And I truly believe that Canada can be like a world-class ecosystem. But compared to Silicon Valley and even New York, I spend a lot of time in New York these days. We have a lot of customers there and partners. Like it's just a level of intensity and the culture of finding customers and the serendipity. It's just very difficult to match that in an ecosystem like Toronto. And I've tried like over the years. So that's one thing I would do. I would start in Silicon Valley.
Saroop, first, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your insights with us. It has been a pleasure to have you on Behind Numbers.
Thank you, Alessandro. Always a pleasure.
And to everyone else listening, thank you for joining us. If you have enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow Behind Numbers for more stories from the leaders shaping the future of business and finance. I'm Alessandro Cozzi. See you next time.